My name is Adaora. I am 34 years old, and the morning my sister stood at the head of the boardroom and presented my 18 months of work as her own, I did not make a single sound. I had spent a year and a half building that proposal. It was a full restructuring plan for OSE Distributors, the logistics company our father built from one delivery van into a regional operation with 40 employees. I had interviewed every department head. I had pulled 3 years of financial records. I had redesigned the routing system, renegotiated 2 supplier contracts in draft form, and written a 60-page document that sat on my laptop under a folder called Q3 Strategy. Vera stood at the front of the room in the yellow blazer she wore when she wanted to be noticed. She clicked through my slides. She used my numbers. She spoke my words back to me as if she had written them at midnight the way I had, hunched over my desk with cold tea going stale beside me. My father sat at the head of the table beaming. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye. The staff applauded. I sat in my chair with my hands flat on the table and felt something cold and steady settle in my chest. I went back to my office after the applause died down and sat at my desk without turning on the lights. Through the glass partition I could see Vera in the corridor, laughing with 2 of the senior staff. She had her hand on the arm of Mr. Boateng, our head of operations, and she was explaining something with the easy confidence of a person who believed she had just done something real. I watched her carefully. She was good at the performance. She had always been good at that, the warm laugh, the firm handshake, the way she filled a room with energy and left people feeling seen. What she was not good at was the substance underneath. I had watched her stumble twice during the presentation when anyone pushed past the surface of the numbers. She had said the projected margin improvement was 14% when the document said 12%. She had called the northern route optimization a secondary priority when my plan listed it as the primary driver of the cost reduction. Small mistakes, but mistakes made by someone reciting, not understanding. I pulled up my laptop and opened the original document. I checked the metadata. Creation date. Last modified date. My name in the author field. 2 days after the presentation, my parents invited Vera to a private dinner at the house and did not tell me about it until my mother called the next morning, still glowing, to describe how proud she was. She said Vera had impressed everyone. She said the investors were asking follow-up questions and the response had been confident and thorough. She said my father had told Vera she was finally stepping into her potential. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to every word. My mother did not ask how I was doing. She did not mention my name in connection with a strategy once. She talked about Vera the way people talk about someone who has just been discovered, as if the work had appeared fully formed out of her daughter's brilliance. I said I was glad it had gone well. I said I would see them Sunday. I ended the call. I had understood the dynamic between Vera and me for a long time, but understanding something and watching it confirmed in real time are 2 different experiences. Our parents had always orbited Vera more closely. She was louder, more visible, quicker to fill silence. I began collecting evidence the following week. Quietly, methodically, the way I do everything. I pulled the email thread from the original briefing my father had given me in February. His message was clear. He had asked me specifically to develop a growth strategy for Q3. He had used the word Adaora 3 times in that single message. I found the draft history in the shared company drive. 14 versions of the document, all under my login credentials, spanning from February through the end of July. I found my handwritten planning notes from a Friday afternoon session I had held with Festus and 2 other analysts. I found the calendar invites I had sent for the research interviews. All of it carried timestamps. All of it carried my name. I printed nothing yet. I saved copies to a personal cloud account and a portable drive I kept in my bag. Then I opened the investor update Vera had sent out 3 days after the boardroom presentation. She had forwarded my executive summary with her name in the header. She had changed 1 word in the subject line and nothing else. I read it twice. I saved it. Vera was already sharing the strategy with investors as if implementation had begun. The investor meeting was held in the smaller conference room on a Thursday morning. I was not invited. I found out about it from Festus, who had been asked to prepare the room. I positioned myself near the glass-walled corridor that ran along the outside of the conference room and worked at the standing desk there, which was close enough to observe without being obvious. Vera opened well. She had practiced the opening slides and she delivered them with the polish she was capable of when she had rehearsed. But 30 minutes in, one of the investors, a careful man named Mr. Apong who had worked with my father for 12 years, asked about the Northern Corridor routing specifically. He asked why the projected fuel savings were calculated on a fixed rate rather than a variable rate, given that fuel costs in that region had fluctuated significantly over the past 18 months. Vera smiled. She said the model accounted for that. Mr. Apong nodded and asked her to explain how. She looked at her slides. She said the detail was in the appendix. She said she would follow up with a more specific breakdown. Mr. Apong wrote something in his notebook. I turned back to my work. Festus came to find me that same afternoon. He closed my office door behind him, which he had never done before. He said he had watched the investor meeting from the corridor and had seen Mr. Apong's expression when Vera could not answer the routing question. He said 2 other staff members had commented privately that the presentation felt different from the written document they had received, as if the person presenting it had not written it. I listened to all of this without reacting. He said, "I know this strategy came from you. I was in 3 of your research sessions. I have the calendar invites." I asked him what he thought I should do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I had already been thinking myself. He said, "If you confront her now, it will look like jealousy. Your parents will protect her. The investors do not know you yet. You need them to know you first before they can believe you." He was right. Direct confrontation at this stage would hand Vera exactly the narrative she needed. The difficult younger sister. The one who could not handle someone else succeeding. I had watched my family rewrite history before to protect her feelings. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had a particular atmosphere that week. My father sat at the head of the table and spoke about the future of the company with an energy I had not heard from him in a long time. He talked about the expansion into the Northern Corridor as if it were Vera's vision. He talked about the investor confidence as if she had built it from scratch. He described her presentation style as mature and strategic. Vera sat across from me and smiled at every compliment. He added small details here and there, embellishments I recognized because the real details beneath them were mine. I ate my food and asked my father careful questions, not challenging ones, clarifying ones. I asked about implementation timelines. I asked which supplier contracts had been prioritized. I watched Vera's face each time I asked because she did not always know the answers to questions about her own presentation. At one point she said the western route would be reviewed in the second quarter. My plan said the first quarter. My father accepted her answer without question. After dinner, as I was helping my mother clear the table, I heard Vera in the sitting room on her phone. A week later Vera came to my office with a proposition. She sat across from my desk with the particular smile she used when she wanted something. She said she had been thinking about the next phase of the strategy, the implementation planning, and she felt it would be stronger if we collaborated. She said my attention to detail would complement her client-facing strengths. She said it could be good for both of us. I kept my expression open and agreeable. I said I would be glad to help. What she did not know, as she sat across from me describing the collaboration she had in mind, was that I had already decided to say yes before she asked. Because working alongside her on the implementation gave me something I did not yet have. It gave me a front-row seat to how she operated. Over the next 2 weeks I sat in every planning session she ran. I watched her take credit in the room and then privately ask me questions afterward that she should have been able to answer if the original thinking had been hers. I watched her change numbers in the working documents and then present the changed numbers as refinements she had developed. And I found something else. The implementation planning meetings were held every Tuesday morning. By the 3rd week I had settled into a rhythm that gave me exactly what I needed. I contributed enough to be useful. I asked questions that sounded supportive but were carefully designed to expose the edges of what Vera actually understood. In the second Tuesday meeting, with 4 senior staff in the room, I raised a concern about the supplier renegotiation timeline. I said it gently. I said I wanted to make sure we had accounted for the standard 45-day review period that our primary supplier required before any contract revision could take effect. Vera said we had. I nodded and asked which clause in the draft contract covered that provision. She looked at her papers. She said she would confirm the specific clause and follow up. One of the senior staff, a woman named Abina who had been with the company for 9 years, glanced across at me. She said nothing, but I saw her write something on her notepad. After the meeting, Vera found me in the corridor. Her voice was even and pleasant. She said she appreciated the thoroughness. I said I just wanted to make sure we got it right. She smiled and walked away. It was Festus who found the notebook. Vera had left it in the small meeting room after a call she had taken in there alone. Festus brought it to me within the hour, still open to the page she had been writing on. It was a planning document in her handwriting. Dates, names, bullet points. She had written out talking points for the next investor presentation with notes to herself in the margins. Some of those margin notes were revealing. Next to one of the financial projections she had written, check with a, she will know the real number. Next to the routing section she had written, do not go deeper than slide level. Deflect to appendix if pressed. Next to a section on supplier timelines she had written, this is where Apong pushed. Prepare a better non-answer. I read through the whole notebook. At the back, on the last few pages, she had begun outlining the framework for the next major strategy document. The headings were almost identical to a second proposal I had been developing privately, one I had not shared with anyone. I did not understand how she had accessed that thinking until I remembered that Vera had borrowed my laptop 3 weeks earlier to check an email when her phone had died. The second investor meeting was larger than the first. My father had invited Mr. Apong back along with 2 new contacts, a woman named Mrs. Asare and a man named Mr. Achimpong, both of whom represented significant capital and long relationships with the company. I sat in the room this time. Vera had included me in the invitation under the title Support Lead, which was her way of keeping me present without giving me a platform. Vera opened strongly. She had clearly prepared more carefully this time, and for the first 15 minutes she was persuasive and polished. Then Mr. Apong came back to the routing question. He said he had reviewed the appendix she had sent and still had a follow-up. He asked about the specific formula used to calculate the variable fuel rate and whether it had been stress-tested against the price spikes of the previous 2 winters. Vera said the model was robust. Mr. Apong said he was sure it was, but he would like to understand the methodology. Vera looked at her slides. She looked at her notes. She said the detailed methodology was something she could walk through separately in a follow-up session. Mr. Apong looked across the table. Not at Vera. Me. I did not answer Mr. Apong's question. Not fully. I said I was happy to share some context and gave a partial explanation that was accurate but stopped well short of the complete answer I could have given. I framed it as supporting Vera's presentation rather than speaking for myself. I said she and I could follow up with the full methodology detail in writing. Vera smiled across the table. Tight, careful smile. After the investors left, my parents called the 2 of us into my father's office. He said the meeting had gone well but that he wanted stronger technical preparation for the next round. He said he needed whoever was leading the investor relationships to be able to answer detailed questions without deferring. He said this looking at Vera. My mother, sitting beside him, said, maybe Eduora should take more of a supporting role in the preparation. You 2 work well together. He nodded. I said I was glad to help in whatever way was needed. Vera said she agreed and that collaboration was the best approach. We walked out of my father's office together. In the corridor she turned to me and said, almost conversationally, I would appreciate if you let me lead the room next time. The company newsletter was circulated on the first Friday of the month. This edition featured a profile of Vera under the headline Driving the Future. How Vera Osei is reshaping the company's growth strategy. I read it at my desk. There was a photograph of Vera at the boardroom whiteboard, pointing at a diagram that came directly from page 31 of my document. The article quoted her speaking about her vision for the Northern Corridor expansion and her approach to investor relations. My name appeared once in a sentence that described me as having provided analytical support. I printed the newsletter and added it to the folder I had been building for 6 weeks. Then I called Festus. I told him it was time to move from collecting to preparing. I told him I needed him to help me organize everything into a clear sequence that could be presented to someone who had no prior context and could still understand the full picture in under 20 minutes. He asked me when I was planning to act. I told him not yet. I said the sister had just given herself a public profile, which meant that when the truth came out, it would be more visible and more consequential than if I had confronted her quietly the week after the boardroom. Abina came to my office on a Wednesday afternoon and closed the door. She sat down and folded her hands on her knees and said she had something she needed to tell me. She said she had known for some time that the strategy presented in the boardroom was not Vera's work. She said she had recognized the structure and the specific language from a document review session I had run in April, 2 months before the boardroom presentation, at which she had been present. She said she had not spoken up because she was afraid of what it would mean to contradict Vera in front of the family. She said our parents held significant weight in the company and she had a daughter starting university next year. I told her I understood completely. I told her I was not asking her to do anything that put her position at risk. She said, "I want to help. I have been sitting with this for weeks and it is not sitting well." I asked her what she had that could be useful. She opened her bag and placed a printed copy of the April meeting notes on my desk. Her own handwriting. By the end of that week I had everything I needed in one place. The original February email from my father assigning the strategy work to me specifically. 14 version drafts from the company drive with my login credentials and consecutive timestamps from February through July. The calendar invites and meeting records from my research sessions. Abina's signed April meeting notes. Festus's written account of the 3 sessions he had attended. The notebook photographs. The investor update email Vera had sent with my executive summary under her name. The newsletter profile. And one more item I had not anticipated finding. In the implementation folder on the shared drive, I discovered that Vera had saved a client contact list under her personal files. The list contained 12 contacts I had developed over 2 years through my own relationship building work. Contacts I had never formally transferred to any shared system because they were connections I had cultivated personally. She had not just taken the strategy. She had taken the network built to execute it. I added a screenshot of the file metadata to the folder. Name. The date she had saved it. The creation date of the original list, which traced back to my activity. I closed the folder. I invited Vera to the Thursday session as a collaboration meeting. I sent the invitation from my company calendar with a note that said I had been pulling together some implementation details and thought it would be useful to align before the next investor round. I kept the tone warm and collegial. I copied no one else on the original invitation. Then I separately arranged for 3 other people to attend. Festus, who would manage the room setup. Abina, who would be present as a senior staff observer. And Mr. Boateng, the head of operations, who I told I needed his input on the routing implementation. Mr. Boateng had been with the company for 14 years and had the institutional memory to recognize inconsistencies in any account of how the strategy had developed. I prepared 12 questions for the session. Each one was specific. Each one could only be answered correctly by someone who had done the original thinking. What was the rejection criterion for the secondary supplier considered in March? What was the reason the Eastern Corridor was deprioritized in the second draft? What was the outcome of the interview with the Kumasi depot manager, and how did it shape the routing conclusion? These were not trick questions. Vera arrived exactly on time, which was something she did when she wanted to project control. She saw Abina and Mr. Boateng and paused for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled and greeted everyone as if a group session had always been what she expected. I opened by saying I wanted to use the time to stress test the implementation plan before the next investor round. I said I had some detailed questions that I thought would help us prepare better answers for people like Mr. Pong. Vera nodded. She said she thought that was a good idea. I started with the supplier question. She gave a general answer. I asked for the specific rejection criterion. She said she would need to check her notes. I moved to the Eastern Corridor question. She said the deprioritization was based on cost. I asked what the cost differential had been in the second assessment. She looked at her folder. She said she would need to verify. Mr. Boateng leaned forward and asked about the Kumasi Depot interview. He said he remembered hearing it had raised an important operational flag. He asked what that flag had been and how it had been addressed. Vera looked at her papers. The moment came quietly, the way the most significant moments always do. I had opened my laptop to pull up a reference document, and the screen was visible to the room. Vera glanced at it. Then she looked again. On the screen was the original Q3 strategy document, open to the author information panel. Name, the creation date, the modification history. Had not been an accident. I had opened it intentionally. But I had done it without announcement, without drama, without pointing at it. I simply let it sit there visible while the conversation continued. Festus, who was taking notes at the side of the room, did not react. But I saw his pen pause. Abina looked at the screen. Then she looked at the document on the table in front of her. The implementation summary Vera had distributed before the meeting began. Then she looked back at the screen. Mr. Boateng said, "Whose document is that?" I said it was the original strategy file. I said I had been using it as a reference for my own preparation notes. Mr. Boateng looked at the author field. He looked at Vera. He said nothing. But the silence in the room shifted in a way that was different from anything that had come before. Vera recovered quickly. She said the document I had open was an early working draft that we had both contributed to, and that the final version represented a collaborative process. Mr. Boateng asked when the collaboration had taken place. She said throughout the development period. She said strategy work was rarely done by one person alone. Abina spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm. She said she wanted to share something. She placed the April meeting notes on the table and said she had been in a session in April where the framework was being presented by me as a work in progress, 2 months before the boardroom presentation. Vera said she remembered that session. She said it had been a joint effort. I asked her to describe what she had contributed to that April session specifically. She said she had provided overall direction and had been involved in shaping the key priorities. I asked what the key priorities had been at that stage of the process. She said the Northern Corridor and the supplier relationships. I asked which suppliers. She said the primary distribution partners. I asked for a name. I paused. She said she would need to look at the records. Mr. Boateng sat back in his chair. After the session ended, I asked everyone to give Vera and me a few minutes alone. When the door closed, she sat very still across from me. The performance had gone out of her. She was not smiling. She was looking at the table. I spoke quietly. I said I was not going to have a fight with her. I said I had not brought her into this room to embarrass her. I said I was offering her a choice. She could go to our parents and to the investors herself and correct the record. She could say that she had misrepresented the process and that the strategy had come from me. She could do it in a way that preserved some dignity for both of us. Or I would present what I had, and it would not come from her. Vera looked at me for a long time. The expression on her face moved through several things in the space of a few seconds. Something that might have been shame. Something that was definitely calculation. Then something that settled into cold refusal. She said, "This company belongs to our family. You will not do anything that damages this family." She stood. She straightened her blazer. She walked to the door. The review session with the investors and senior staff was held the following Tuesday. I had framed it to my father as a necessary step before the next funding conversation, an internal audit of the implementation planning to make sure all parties were aligned. I had told him I would be presenting a status overview. He had agreed without much thought, which told me the detail of internal operations had always been something he left to us. 12 people were in the room. Mr. Apong had accepted a re-invitation. Mrs. Asare had come. Mr. Boateng and Abina were present. Festus managed the room. 4 other senior staff completed the group. Vera sat near the door. I presented for 35 minutes. I walked through the development history of the Q3 strategy chronologically. I showed the February email from my father assigning the work to me. I showed the draft timeline with dates and credentials. I showed the April meeting notes in Abina's handwriting. I showed the investor email Vera had sent with my executive summary. I showed the client list file metadata. I did not raise my voice once. I presented facts in sequence the way I would present a financial analysis. My father did not speak during the presentation. He sat at the far end of the table and his face moved through expressions I had never seen on him before: discomfort, confusion, something that looked very much like the beginning of embarrassment. When it ended, he asked everyone except family to give us a moment. The staff and investors filed out. Festus closed the door. My mother looked at Vera. Vera was looking at the table. My father said, "Is this true?" Vera said the situation was more complicated than it appeared. She said the strategy had evolved through conversation and that credit in a family business was a shared thing. My father said, "The February email has your sister's name on it. The documents have her name on them. Are you telling me the evidence is wrong?" Vera said she had contributed. My father said, "To which part?" She did not answer. My mother put her hand over her mouth. She looked at me. It was the first time in the entire process that she had looked at me the way she was looking at me now, as if she were seeing something she had chosen not to look at for a long time. My father sat back. The larger investor presentation was rescheduled for the following Friday. This time I was the named presenter. My father made the introduction himself. He said the Q3 growth strategy had been developed by me and that he wanted to ensure the right person was leading the conversation with their investment partners going forward. He said it briefly and without drama. I presented for 40 minutes. I knew every number. I answered every question from Mr. Apong, including the routing methodology question he had asked twice before. I walked through the variable fuel rate formula and the stress testing against the previous 2 winter price cycles. I explained the Kumasi Depot finding and how it had shaped the final routing recommendation. Mr. Apong smiled during that section. Not broadly. Just the small, satisfied smile of someone whose instincts had been confirmed. Mrs. Asare asked 4 detailed questions about the supplier renegotiation timeline. I answered all 4 without consulting a single note. At the end of the session she said, "This is the clearest presentation of an operational strategy one have heard in this sector in 2 years. I would like to schedule a follow-up." Vera was not in the room. She had sent a message that morning saying she was unwell. I thanked Mrs. In the weeks that followed, Vera came to the office less frequently. When she did come, she moved differently through the building, quieter, less inclined to stop in the corridor and hold court the way she used to. The easy authority she had carried for months had lost its shape. Staff who had previously orbited her with their updates and their questions began routing those conversations to me instead. Not because I had asked them to. Because information follows credibility and credibility follows demonstrated understanding, and the room had now seen both clearly enough to make its own adjustments. Mr. Boateng stopped by my office one afternoon and told me he had seen this kind of thing before in family businesses. He said the hardest part was not the exposure but what came after, the quieter, longer work of rebuilding trust. He said I had handled it with more restraint than most people could have managed. Thanked him. That Sunday my parents came to see me at my apartment. Not a planned dinner. My father called an hour before and asked if he could come. They sat in my small living room and my father said the things he had not said in the boardroom because he had needed time to understand the full scope of what had happened. 3 months after the boardroom morning when Vera stood at the front of the room in her yellow blazer and spoke my words back to me, I sat at the head of the table myself for the first time. Mrs. Asare had committed to a partnership. Mr. Achimpong had followed. The Northern Corridor expansion was moving into its first operational phase with the revised supplier contracts I had drafted now formally signed. My father had restructured my title to reflect what my actual role had always been. The strategy lead position that had existed in practice for 18 months was now acknowledged on paper. Vera and I had not spoken privately since the conference room. I did not carry anger toward her. Anger is a weight, and I had put mine down sometime during the 6 weeks of careful, quiet preparation. What I carried instead was clarity about what I was capable of, about what I required from the people around me, about the kind of patience that is not the same as passivity. I had let her take the credit because taking it back by force would have proven nothing and cost everything. The truth was always in the documents. I had simply needed to give it the right room.